Star Wars 7x7 episode 3008. I'm not sure whether this is an everything you know is wrong scenario or a continuity is for wimps scenario or what, but this is our deep dive episode into episode 3 of the Cassian Andor series entitled Reckoning, where we consider what we knew about Cassian Andor and what we think we know now. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Doylott and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So much of what we know about Cassian Andor, much of what we thought we knew, comes from the Rogue One Ultimate Visual Guide, and here are the facts that we have. We'll comment on the veracity of them in due course. Number 1, that he was born on Fest. Yeah, I know. Number 2, that he's 26 years old. Number 3, that he, quote, came of age fighting the Republic during the Clone Wars. Number 4, that he grew up in the wilds of the Outer Rim territories. Number 5, that his father was killed at the Karita Military Academy in a protest against Republic militarism. Number 6, that Cassian was not formally part of a separatist group, but he was in an insurrectionist-backed cell that was attacking Republic equipment and Republic troops. And 7th, finally, what a lucky coincidence, that he claims to have been in the battle since he was 6 years old. Now, let's start knocking some of those things down. For a start, we know that Fest is not accurate. It's a cover story we've been given to understand, thanks to the Andor series, to explain where Cassian came from, how he came to be in the care of Marva and Clem Andor. The bit about him growing up in the wilds of the Outer Rim territories, that can still be accurate because certainly we are in the Outer Rim right now with the Preox Morlana corporate authority situation. We don't know for sure if we're in the Outer Rim, but I think we're pretty sure we're in the Outer Rim with this situation. But there are other elements of his story that just don't make sense, and elements that have been introduced to us in the Cassian Andor series so far that don't make sense unless we consider the possibility that another of those facts about Cassian Andor in the Rogue One Ultimate Visual Guide is in fact false, is in fact a cover story, and that is his age. So he's reported to be 26 years old at the time that we see him in Rogue One, which means that he would have had to have been born in 26 BBY. If that's the case, then he's coming of age during the Clone Wars. That would mean that he's between 4 and 7 years old during that conflict. And that means that he only started throwing sticks and rocks and bottles at Republic troops for a year before the Clone Wars ended. Not so much of a sticking point. But it also gets weird when you look at what's happened in the Andor series in the flashbacks, when we see that frigate crash on Kenari and we see people wearing what appear to be separatist logos on their gear. So that means that this is an active separatist ship in this time period, and yet the Cassian, Cassa, that we see in this time period is definitely not 6 years old. He's much older than that. I swear to you I've seen 12 years old listed somewhere. I am not sure where I've seen that, but that's the age that I feel like works, because one of the Kenari girls, the Alpha Kenari, is listed as being 16 years old. There is a younger Kenari female who shows up who's described in the audio description as being 13 years old, and Cassa does not seem to be quite on a par with that age. So I would say he's between 10 and 12 years old when we see him in these flashbacks. But there's been a new element published that may shed some more light on this and also lends credence to the idea that Cassian is actually older than we've been told he is. And that has to do with the trivia gallery that's been posted on StarWars.com for episode 3 of the series. They have a thing about the flashback sequence and they describe when it takes place. It says the flashbacks in this episode, and I should interrupt and say that all of the flashbacks on Kenari happen one after the other. So it's really all the Kenari flashbacks in episodes 1 through 3. Here's the back to the trivia thing, take place in the later years of the Republic prior to the Clone Wars. And it goes on to say that Marva and Clem are worried about an approaching Republic frigate and that the crew members of this downed Corsair are wearing logos that are closely related to the Separatist Alliance. Or I should say closely related to the eventual Separatist Alliance, it says. So that means that these flashbacks have to be taking place prior to 22 BBY, and because I'm suggesting that Cassian is maybe 12 years old in these flashbacks, let's call it 24 BBY. So with the 12, it makes it 36 BBY when he was born. So he's 10 years older than we actually thought he was. That's the round number I was going for. And we know there was a whole bunch of nefarious stuff going on in the background with the Separatists and whatnot. So it kind of makes sense that maybe within 2 years of the Clone Wars, that something related to Separatist activity could have been happening somewhere behind the scenes, right? And under that theory, Cassian would not be between 4 and 7 years old during the Clone Wars. He would be between 14 and 17 years old. That would also be in keeping with the idea of what coming of age looks like in the Star Wars galaxy. That also seems to present a reasonable solution for the issue of his father being killed at the Kurita Military Academy in a protest against Republic militarism, because we wouldn't have seen Republic militarism until the Clone Wars, because the judicial forces were the ones in charge of any sort of quote-unquote military activity prior to the Clone Wars, and even they were kind of stepping back as the Jedi were stepping forward as ambassadors of peace and justice in the galaxy. So that would mean that, unfortunately, sadly, it would be Clem Andor, who we met in these flashbacks, that would be the father who was killed at the Kurita Military Academy. This would also cover the bit about him becoming part of a Confederacy-backed insurrectionist cell at a quote-unquote young age. The only thing this doesn't solve is the issue of Cassian's statement to Jyn Erso in Rogue One when he says, "I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old." If he really is 10 years older, roughly, than we think he is, then that would put it at 30 BBY, which would mean it was just after the events of The Phantom Menace. So here we have to go into pure speculation, and I think I have a reasonable theory for this one. So we know that the Republic military that appeared magically in Attack of the Clones was built by companies like Rathana Heavy Engineering and Quat Drive Yards and whatnot, but they needed the material to create these massive fleets of ships, and it would have taken them a long time to do that. Now, what do we know about Sheev Palpatine's dark machinations? We know, or machinations, I always thought it was machinations, I don't know. Anyway, we know that he loves to construct things in secret, see for example the Death Star, and so a place like Kenari, described as obscure by these Corpo forces that we meet in the Andor series, seems like the kind of place where if they needed to mine for materials that would be used in the construction of starships, then you'd want to do it in some obscure, out-of-the-way place. And since these were for the Republic, so these are Republic people doing this, then the folks on Kenari would be seeing members of the Republic creating these mines, strip mining their world, turning it into an industrial wasteland. And considering that we're only seeing children in this tribe, quite possibly using the adults as slave labor, because certainly Sheev Palpatine is a fan of that. And that would very much give Casa and the rest of his tribe reasons to get into the quote-unquote fight against the Republic as early as possible. Oh, and by the way, as a related fun fact, coincidence? Maybe not. Diego Luna, the actor who plays Cassian Andor, is currently 42 years old, which would have made him 36 years old at the time Rogue One came out. Or, like George Lucas is supposed to have said, I've seen this attributed to him, but I've never actually seen like the pure source for the quote to know for sure if it's true. But allegedly he said continuity is for wimps. So I don't know, but I really feel like, no, they're pretty careful about this stuff. And so the fact that we know Fest is wrong because there's a whole cover story around it does make me think that that's not the only thing that's wrong. And I think his age is the key to unlocking all of the rest of it. I'd love to know what you think, though, about this. So please drop me a comment on Twitter, SW7X7 Podcast, wherever you see a tweet about this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, share a comment there and let me know what you think, or at the blog post for the show's episode at SW7X7.com. And that is going to do it for our deep dive into Reckoning, which is episode 3 of the Cassian Andor series, and that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.